Good morning, Ugly Mug marketing friends and followers. Welcome to another edition of Ugly Mug Marketing Coffee Chats, the live show where we drink our coffee and talk about marketing, leadership, business, and everything in between. My name is Hanna Balliet, and I am the Director of Communications and Teaching here at Ugly Mug. And today I am joined by Hanna Broom. No, it is not a requirement to be named Hanna to work at Ugly Mug. Hanna is
Oh,
our leader. Sorry, what were you going to say?
oh, somebody called yesterday and they're like, "Hey, Hannah, I have that information we talked about." And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I was like, "You're looking for the other Hannah. Got it."
No, and we both always say other Hannah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Hannah is our fearless leader of our marketing department at Ugly Mug. And I'm really excited about our conversation today because so many of us are tired of answering the same emails over and over, whether you are in customer service or you are the owner of a business or you are on the marketing team. And you are probably answering tons of inquiries or questions about your business that, again, are feeling a little bit redundant and a little exhausting. So today I've asked Hannah to come on the show and discuss how canned email messages can, number one, save you time, but also expedite response times and ultimately create a better customer experience because everyone knows we live in a world of instant gratification, especially when it comes to interacting with a business. And so this can really help make sure that people are having that instant gratification with your company or with your business when it comes to those inquiries and questions. So without further ado, welcome to the show today, Hannah.
Howdy. Morning.
Morning. So let's jump right into things. What is a canned email? Where
Yes.
do we find that?
And I used that word with our coworker Lily, the other day, and she was like, "That's not the word I use." So everybody calls it something a little bit different. It could be called an email template. It could be a canned email. There's a bunch of different things, and I commented below. I don't know if it pasted necessarily in the most readable format, but how you would enable this in your particular email software that you use. But basically, it is it can be a template, just standard text or language that you use and you need to use often.
Mhm.
So, a very short and simple one that we use internally, to give you an example, is if someone calls and says, "Hey, I want to work with Ugly Mug, and what are the next steps and what does that look like?" We have internally a canned template email that we go in and we customize, add the person's name, add,
Yep.
"Hey, we scheduled you a meeting for this day," those kinds of things. But instead of rewriting that email brand new and possibly forgetting something or coming off short and not descriptive, we already have that text
Yeah.
ready to go.
Yeah. And I think like one thing to note just for us specifically, it's based on like what service they've inquired about. So it's like there's a version that has some language around websites, there's a version that has language around social media or PPC, or there's just like kind of like a generic one. So I think that can be like helpful because maybe your business offers a variety of different services or products. And so having kind of that canned response based on like the specific conversation or specific product can be really helpful really when you're thinking about it from the customer's end more than anything else. So yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. Again, like very like layman's terms, a template. Like a template that you can go back to and use again and again. So ultimately, and you kind of already answered this, but like how can canned messages save us time as a business owner or someone who is fielding those inquiries for a business?
So yes, they can save you time, and that's super important. But I also think that it helps with maybe conversion rates when it comes to sales as well. And I'll come back to that example in just a second.
Yeah.
But just time, because if you look at your inbox, if you take a bird's eye view of your inbox for a week, how often do you get some of the same emails? For example, like I'll get an email from like old clients or a referral saying like, "Hey, we want to work with Ugly Mug. What are the next steps?"
Hmm.
And those next steps are the same. And instead of me having to type that email up from scratch every time, it's easy for me just to say, "Here's the next step. Here's the information you need."
Yeah.
Another thing is we use them internally a lot. Like I was saying, if if I answer the phone and I need to send a message to somebody else, we have a template that says like, okay, fill in the name, email address, contact information, all of that. And then the other thing I use it for is more for specific client projects. So,
Nice.
for example, I mean, this was months ago, but I was researching potential speakers for an event that I was doing the event planning on. And so I had a canned email that if I wanted to send out an inquiry to a particular speaker, I mean, all of that information was there because
Um,
what was cool is I had sent that email out like 2 or 3 times and I got back the same questions each time. So I then updated the email to include the answers to those questions. And it just, here's everything you might need to know to give me a quote and your availability on this date.
yeah.
And so it just really helps to provide a cohesive answer. And then personally, like, I think I even talked about this in the email that I wrote, but like whenever you're requesting something, like if someone has a form on their website and it's like, are you inquiring about this or this? And you're trying to get pricing or information. I'm just going to give an example. So, if let's say that I'm getting married, already married, I'm not getting married, but let's say I was getting married and I wanted pricing on photography services.
Yeah.
And a particular photographer didn't have their pricing on their website, but they had a form to fill out, say, hey, fill out this form to get more information. Well, to make everybody's life easier, it would be wonderful. Like, I understand if you don't want to post your prices publicly, but to have me fill out that form and then to have a canned response. So, yes, you could set that up as an automation through like MailChimp or something. That's a topic for another day. But just to have that email response, hey, thank you so much for reaching out. Here is
Yeah.
a link to download our pricing. Here's the next steps. Here's my availability. Like all of those informations that you can answer so that you're not having to take the time and manually send all that information over because you're busy. And then it helps with conversion rates because so many times if I reach out to an organization like a business, if I was trying to find this photographer and let's say I filled out that form on 3 different websites. If one person responds to me immediately and gives me their pricing and we start that
Gives
conversation.
me it pretty much answers all of my questions before I even have the chance to ask them. That's who we're going with.
Exactly, exactly. So it's just it helps on both ends.
Yeah, for sure. And I even think about, the photographer that we've used for our family here in Raleigh, like to keep running with that example. Shout out to Katie Britt Photography. If you live in Raleigh, North Carolina, you should absolutely hire her for so many reasons. But I just remember like I was reaching out to like newborn photographers, like when my daughter was born. And I was like, okay, I want to find someone who can like come to our house, is available on this time, like has the overall aesthetic that I have. And I remember I like filled out her form and she got like it was a canned email. It still said my name and felt personalized, like had the month or whatever that we were looking for. But I just remember like the amount of detail in that email was so helpful, not necessarily in that moment, but like once we got back from the hospital and we were like preparing for the photo shoot, like she put on there like have them nap like right before I come or have them be napping when I come and like make sure you give them a full bottle before I arrive so that they look nice and kind of like milk drunk like
Yeah,
when we're taking photos and also, like, here is a closet of clothes. This was the most amazing thing about this photographer. I wasn't even thinking about what our family was going to be wearing or what Charlie was going to be like, kind of swaddle or anything. She was like, I have all of these different swaddles. Here's a link to the library of all the swaddles and everything that I already have. Tell me which ones you want me to bring. And then also for mom, here's a closet of all of the clothes that I already have. And you could just click through, and all you had to do was respond, confirm, tell her your selections for swaddle and for outfit for mom. And I was like, those are things I wouldn't have even been thinking about, questions that maybe other moms had asked in the past that helped her curate this very intentional and specific email with all of these additional needs that are really a benefit of choosing her over maybe another photographer.
yeah,
But ultimately, like, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, in some ways in that moment, information overload, but like having something to come back and reference and not have to go back and forth with her like 30 times, like
yeah. That
so
helps you and her.
Yes,
And like customer service wise, like if she was just individually telling you these things, there's going to be a lot of things she forgets or forgets to link or whatever. So
yeah,
it's just, I can't stress it enough. Like you said, it just creates a wonderful user experience. You have great customer experience with this photographer. And she spent a lot of time up front getting that email perfect and ready for you with all of that data. And then it's ready to go whenever she needs it.
exactly. And I actually really like the, not to get too far down the photographer rabbit hole, but I really like that example because oftentimes photographers don't really have like an admin or anyone who's like managing those inquiries for them. So you can almost view them as like a solopreneur or like if you are watching this live or replay and you're like, I'm like starting the side hustle, but I don't have time to like field these
Yes.
questions or like
Yes.
connect with, all of my customers. Like a photographer is a really wonderful example of someone who's utilizing these, in the examples that Hannah and I gave, utilizing these canned messages and having a really healthy and thriving business and very happy customers, for myself
Exactly.
and other people that I've, referred to Katie since then. Like we're all having really great experiences and it's because the amount of level of detail that is provided, in the communication because even leading up, like, since then we've done like a mini shoot with her and I know I'm getting a canned response because everyone who signed up for this mini shoot's getting it, but it had like a screenshot of the parking lot of the park that we were visiting
Love
at
that.
and an arrow pointing of where to park and then an arrow where you could expect to find her like scoping out lighting and
Yes.
pictures of the colors of blankets I'm going to bring and like, all of these other details. She's one person doing all of this. And yes, like you said, took her a lot of work on the front end to put together all of those details, but not having to then communicate with the 30 families that signed up for this mini shoot, like such a time saver, such a remarkable experience and not having to do all of the back and forth.
Yeah, and then okay, one more step farther, this is just a great analogy, is not even an analogy, example.
Yes.
Okay, so after and she's ready to deliver the photos. So you could get 2 different emails. You could get an email say like, "Hey, here's your photos, link below." Or you could get an email that says like, "Hi, I'm so excited to share your gallery with you. Here's a link to your photos. Here's some good things to note. If you need this, here's a good place to print them." Like
Yes.
all these other things. The
Fabulous.
amount of time that it takes her to put a link in either email is about the same, but the data and just the like vibe, like I'm sure you paid a good amount of money for her photography and you want it to feel that way because you don't want just a random email like, hey, here's a link, go for it. Like the whole experience really helps you feel like you're getting the value for your money in addition to these incredible photos.
Yes. And I think that's the important thing about a canned email is it is an extension of your brand and of what people can expect when they meet you face to face. Like I had never met Katie face to face. Like for the newborn shoot, I had only followed her on Instagram, seen her post on Instagram stories, but all of that was building an experience and an anticipation of what she would be like when I met her. Now, she's even more wonderful than her canned email responses and all of that, but it was still a part of building the experience and building the relationship with us so that we would come back again and we would do family photo shoot with her in the spring and that we would sign up for fall mini shoots, later this fall to prep for our Christmas card. I mean, all of these things are just such an important component of our brand and of what people can expect. So I kind of want to use that thought to go into the next question for you, Hannah, which would be what are 3 canned messages that nearly like any business could or should have in place for their company when they're thinking about, putting this in place? I loved your idea too, like outside of this, like these 3 examples, your idea of like going back and looking at your emails and being like, what questions? Like when you were talking about sending out that request to speakers, what questions were they then asking back so that you could determine what you needed to have in the email? That could be an excellent place to start. Like
For
these
sure.
examples Hannah's about to give us, like are a good place to start. But if you want to get even more specific, go back and look at your inbox and like, what are people specifically asking about? Or when I do have dialogue with someone, what additional questions do they have that I could include in that canned email response? But without diving into
Yeah.
all of those things, like what are those 3 different types or categories of messages that businesses could or should have in place?
Yeah. So one, we've touched on this, but I just think a general inquiry. If someone is reaching out to ask you about your services or your product or whatever it is, to have a very concise and aesthetically pleasing email that says like, here's our services, here's some samples of our work, here's pricing, whatever that might include, and then
Mhm.
a call to action or what's next. So if you read this and you want to move forward, what's next? So just an
Mhm.
overall general inquiry of who you are and what we can offer. I think
Yeah.
that's super important. And then kind of like a bonus tip, we are huge fans. Another kind of like do it once and it's easier is
Mhm.
Calendly, or I use
Yeah.
Boomerang Calendar. So basically, it is software that connects with your calendar and it knows when you have availability. So if you ever send out an email and you're trying to coordinate a meeting and you're like, hey, I have availability on this day at this time, or this day at this time, or this day at
And
this
you're
time,
like
and it's like,
listing out times, and then
and
none of
they
them
don't,
work for any of the people you're
yes,
trying to meet with.
yes. So I use Boomerang just because it integrates really flawlessly with our Gmail email software. But if
Mhm.
somebody wants to meet with me, I have one set up for 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45, 60 minutes. It links to my Zoom. And I'm like, here's a link. Choose whatever time and day works best for you. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like a little bonus tip that I highly recommend. So
Mhm.
that's category number one. Do you
Yep.
want me to move on
Love
to
that.
category two?
Let's hit it.
Yeah. So this one is a little bit more specific to like you and your industry. But for example, um, what are some common questions you may receive? So
Mm.
perhaps what I'm kind of thinking is when we launch a new website or we're working with a website clients and they might have specific questions on like how their website should function or common issues they might receive. So okay, here's a question that we get often like, hey, I updated on my website, something on my website, but I'm not seeing it live. Okay, well, that probably means they need to clear their cache. And how you clear your
Mhm.
cache on 5 different browsers or a Mac versus a PC is
Yeah.
all different. And so just
Yep.
having a canned email saying, here's how to clear your cache based on what browser and what operating system you're using. And so, basically frequently asked questions could be a great one
Yeah.
to have answers to. And maybe you have multiple emails for those different questions.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I was just looking, we got a question from Tiffany Welch. She says, "What was the info for calendar to Gmail? What app or software?" So can you repeat
Yeah,
those
so
2?
Boomerang, their logo is looks like a boomerang, but it's like colorful. And it's actually a plugin that or an app. What's it called? Extension.
I
Extension.
think it's a
Google.
extension. Yeah, I was like plug-in or extension.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So just Google it, Google Boomerang for Gmail. And it has some other great so
Features.
things, features
Yes.
as well. But Boomerang for Gmail, and it's free or it's very inexpensive. Highly recommend it.
Yes. And then Calendly, you can just build out your own Calendly link and you can link that to your calendar. And you could just have that in, a lot of people will actually have their Calendly link in their signature of their email. So
Mm-hmm.
that it automatically populates there. And so, I have that with actually a lot of like brand managers that I'll work with. They'll be like, hey, can you click the link in my signature to schedule a meeting with me? That has all of my availability. And that one's nice too, because just like Boomerang, that also syncs with your calendar. So it'll only show times that are available for you. So good question, Tiffany. And like Hannah said, those are just bonus features and tools that are things that you can add into these canned responses to make customer experience more seamless, less back and forth on your end as well. So we talked about product, service, information, kind of inquiries, requests. including those plugins or extensions like Boomerang or Calendly to make that even more seamless. Talked about having those frequently asked questions as well. So once you know what someone's inquiring about, maybe you could even send a canned follow-up response to that. And I know we're not necessarily talking about this, but if you have some level of automation or sequence of emails that you could then start someone into once you had that initial response go to them about their inquiry, maybe the next step is for them to get those frequently asked questions about that particular product or service or experience with your company or brand. So let's talk about the third category, which we've kind of already talked about with
Yeah.
scheduling meetings, appointments, but let's just touch on that one too.
Well, something that I kind of wanted to backtrack on, it's a different way to interpret the first one that we talked about. So we
Yeah.
recently, for one of our clients, we did some secret shopping. So we called other competitors in the community that are in the same industry as this client. And it is a high priced item. And something that we realized is that these people are calling and inquiring about this, and then they hang up the phone. For all of them, even their competitors, it's the same experience. So, what we recommended to our clients is to have a canned email as kind of like a recap of what we discussed on the phone. So, hey, you inquired about blank, and I want to explain, see below for a recap of our conversation. And if you want to move forward, here's the next steps. And just some added
Yeah.
information, because if you're calling all of these people and everybody just verbally tells you some stuff on the phone and you hang up, that person that responds to you with a recap of your phone call conversation is more likely, especially with a high priced item, and that you, like you said, that you can constantly go back and reference and discuss with your family if you want to move forward, you're more
Yeah.
likely to convert that way.
Yeah. I think in a lot of scenarios too, it's like, well, we talked about that. And it's like, oh, no, here's the notes from the call. Like yes, to have that reference point to go back on both sides, for you as the person who's making the call, as the business owner, customer service person, but then also, on the customer side too, to be able to be like, oh, okay, well, we talked about this. Can you refresh my memory on whatever? Yeah, I completely agree that the person who has that additional touch point is going to be the one that gets the business. Because that just shows that extra level of care, of
For sure.
intentionality, especially with a really high ticket item. Not to say that people who don't have necessarily a high ticket product or service should not also be acting on that. I think it still builds a great experience, but especially for those who have something that are a higher ticket item for people. That is crucial to building a really remarkable customer experience too. So love that you brought that up. But
Yeah.
the last one that we were going to talk about was just that meeting and appointment scheduling again, and
Yes.
adding in Boomerang and Calendly. Anything else around that too?
I really don't. I think, the different like categories that I would kind of think are like new inquiries, how you respond to those, current
Yep.
clients and things that frequently ask questions there. And then
Yeah.
internal, like we talked about, if there's internal things like as a manager, I need to get PTO and time whenever it's time for payroll. So I have an automated email that I send to our department internally saying, like, hey, here's what I need and here's the format I need it in. And that goes out
Yeah.
every 2 weeks.
Yeah. I think another thing too, like specifically jumping back to the canned emails for meetings and appointments and including those links in there. If there are specific things that you're going to cover during that meeting, like almost providing some sort of like canned agenda or
Hmm.
something like that
Yeah.
can be helpful depending on the context of the call. Like I would imagine like a photographer in particular, not to keep running with this, but a photographer, especially a wedding photographer, they probably have the same types of questions that they're going through every single call, right? So I remember for my wedding photographer, she had like a questionnaire that I believe she sent over to us in advance. And it was asking some very detailed things because especially think about for a wedding photographer, there's so many dynamics that they're also navigating with families and photos and knowing who can and can't be in things, or, if so and so has beef with so and so, like they actually, like a good photographer wants to know that. And so I just remember her having that questionnaire And I remember filling it out before our call, and then that was essentially the agenda for our conversation. She was like, "Hey, I noticed this. She already read all of the responses prior to our call, but she wanted like to go back and reference some of those key things to ensure she had everything accurate on her end." And so, depending on your industry, it doesn't have to be photography. It doesn't have to be in the wedding industry necessarily, but sometimes including that questionnaire as a piece of information that you'll then utilize to guide you through your call, or just things that maybe you're going to be bringing up and you want them to be thinking about in advance prior to your call. I think that can just be like another helpful thing to include in one of those canned responses as well.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
agree.
Cool.
Yeah.
We've
So
covered so much, Hannah. I know we didn't necessarily you didn't necessarily cover this in your email that goes out to our list. And by the way, if you're not on our Ugly Mug email list, drop your email in the comments section or send us a DM on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook. We'll make sure we get you added to the list so that you can get all these additional resources and things that we cover during coffee chats. But I kind of want to touch on like this idea of like automating some of these things. I know
absolutely.
you're very familiar with, sequences and building some of those out and like really super small business user friendly tools like Mailchimp. Like, can we just like touch on that for a second on like how that can come into play for like leveling up? Like maybe you are at step one, like Hannah shared those tips and those how to's for Gmail and Outlook. Like maybe you're very base level in that right now. And you're like, let me get these set up, these canned responses or these templates set up just within my Gmail as I'm fielding information. But maybe you're like above that. And maybe you do have a marketing tool like, an email marketing tool like MailChimp or like Constant Contact or a full CRM like HubSpot or Entreport, where you're building out some emails for inquiries. Talk to us a little bit about what that process can look like, Hannah.
Now you got me geeking out. That's something that I think like all businesses should do. Again, it's a lot of work up front, but it's going to make everybody's life easier and just really get everything moving and grooving for you and the client. So,
Yeah.
an automation that would be really, really easy is having your inquiry form on your website play out. I'm sorry, I'm stopping myself because I'm like, I want to talk about something else too. But
Yes.
initially, like if somebody is inquiring about your services on your website, to where it automatically drops in. So instead of you having to manually send that canned email every time, they fill out the form and instantaneously they get that email with that response and that information. And then potentially, 2 days later, they could get an additional email saying, here's some more information and just kind of like nurture them along that sequence to help convert them. But the other
Yeah.
thing I was going to say is one of our local clients, Hannah and I talked about this earlier this week. One of our local clients recently hired us to do something that I think is going to be game changing for them internally. So, if somebody wanted to be a new patient and they wanted to like call and give their insurance information and what they're dealing with to see if they are applicable with their insurance and all the things. So, they used to handle those. They would get a phone call during business hours and have to write down, they had about 10 questions they would have to ask the potential patient on the phone. And they would have to get all of those answers. And then they would have to process all of that data and call the client, the potential patient back. So, what we just created was they have like 15 providers. And so,
Mhm.
we've created an online form that someone can fill out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at their leisure. Because how inconvenient is it that you have to call the doctor's office at 2 p.m. when you're in the middle of doing 17 other things? Like, wouldn't it be a lot easier if you could email the doctor your information at 6 p.m. whenever you're at home and have a little more flexibility, or on Saturday morning? So, anyways, the form we filled out, the patient fills out all of their information. And then when they hit submit, based on the provider or the symptoms that they listed, the applicable processor gets that information. They fill it out, and then that person is able to call them. So it's just a very streamlined process. And I really do think that I mean, heck, how much time is that going to save their staff from sitting on the phone and writing down all that information and probably getting some of it incorrect, because talking to people on the phone is hard. Like sometimes it's
Mhm.
harder to hear than it is just to see it typed out. So I'm super excited about all of
And
that.
also, like, if you're calling and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't have my insurance card with me right now," or "I
Yes.
don't know the answer to those questions," or "I'm calling on behalf of, my spouse," or "I'm a caretaker for this person," or, sometimes, like, you don't necessarily have all of that information. So I feel like, yes, in some instances, people would rather talk to a person on the phone, and if they would rather do that, they can still
They
call.
can.
But having that option to fill out all of that information online, to know in advance before you even pick up the phone what exactly you would need so that you can submit it. I'd imagine that on the patient side of things, like, it's creating such a better experience initially, because
Agreed.
then if you are accepted, right, and you are able to be a patient there based on your insurance and all of these other various fields, right, then okay, great, we're going to give you a call and we're going to schedule your appointment. Or maybe there could even be another part of the automation where scheduling online, if that's something that they have
That's what
within
we're
their platform.
Yeah, well, that's what we're working on next. Not necessarily scheduling online, but okay, great. You're signed up for your first appointment. Instead of getting to your first appointment and filling out 17 pages of paperwork and then letting somebody type it in, we are going to create that as an online experience that somebody can fill out on their computer or on their cell phone and have that data filled out in advance of their first appointment. So when they get there, hey, I'm here. And it's a much more seamless process on the
Yeah.
front end, but also on the back end. If I haven't
Yeah,
said that
I love
phrase enough, front end
it.
and back end.
Yeah. So that's just like another kind of way of like leveling up like these canned responses and adding some like automation components to this to really build out ultimately a seamless sales cycle. Sometimes when we hear like canned email, or we're thinking about a form on our website, or that's stuff automatically going to someone on our team and then automatically dumping someone into an email sequence, the on the patient or customer side in this example, we don't necessarily think about that as our marketing, but it is our marketing because it is
Mhm.
all a part of the person's experience with our company, whether we're a photographer or a doctor's office. It's all of the things that are leading up to their experience before they ever even make it into the front doors of our business, or they ever meet us at the park for their spring mini shoot, right? It's all of those things that are happening that are either positively adding to your brand or your experience or their perception of you and your business, or that are negatively impacting their perception or experience with your brand or your business, right? And so I do believe that getting started, right? That very entry level, lower, let me have these templates so that I can quickly respond to people and really seamlessly build a great customer experience by not just responding quickly, but by the content that's included in that canned message, right? I feel like that was what we really talked about today, was like what kind of content creates a really, really good canned response, right? It's not just about quickly responding, but also providing quality content. But I just think like that, don't get lost on like, whoa, that seems like so over our heads, or like what we're talking about today. Like, that's ultimately what we want you guys to get to, right? So start on the low end of adding those canned messages into Gmail or Outlook, right? But then work towards having those automated systems and processes so that you can create a really flawless customer experience for your people. So, gosh, we're slightly over our time, but it's been such a good conversation. Again, Hannah answered our question of like, what the heck even is a canned message, how those can ultimately save us time, but then, helping build a really great customer experience. Like I just mentioned, we talked about those three different types of canned messages that essentially every business could and should have in place: product or service information requests or inquiries, canned messages. Those can be built based on product too, or based on inquiry type. She also talked to us about customer support or frequently asked questions, canned responses too. Those can be pre-built out and a part of an automation, or just in place for a particular product or service. Then we also talked about those handy dandy scheduling tools like Calendly and Boomerang, and how to add those into those meeting and appointment scheduling canned messages as well. And then also a few things to add in those of like, here are some other details around what we're going to be talking about, or here's a questionnaire to fill out as well. You can also include those as far as content for those canned messages. And then the last thing we talked about was just this higher level automation. that doesn't have to be scary and higher level, right? You can build those out in MailChimp, or you can use tools like Zapier to connect your form on your website to your MailChimp account or whatever email software you might be using. So we covered a wide gamut of things when it comes to canned responses, and ultimately upon building a really great customer experience. So thank you again, Hanna, for joining us live today and taking some time out of your day to be with us.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure getting to chat with you.
Yeah. But before we go, I always like to end on like a personal note. So what is one thing, Hanna, that you are really looking forward to really as we're heading into the end of 2024, which is wild to me, right? I cannot
Uh,
believe we're like shortly. I know we're not quite to Q4, but I'm just like September is like preparation for Q4, right? Of heading into
yeah.
like the holidays and busy seasons of businesses, and it's just like crazy. So what is one thing that you're really looking forward to?
Yeah, I was looking at my phone. So we've gotten like a little bitty peak of some slightly cooler weather, and by slightly cooler, I still mean like in the 80s or the 90s, but we're not 100 or 110. And
Yep.
I like this morning, like when we walked outside this morning, it was slightly cooler, and I love fall. So September and October are like my favorite months of the year. So those are just around the corner, and I can't wait for all things fall. I fully embrace it. Got my fall shirts. I'm not a huge pumpkin spice latte girl, to be honest, but
Yeah,
all of the fall
me
things,
either.
bring it.
Yeah. I know. I'm like, hot take. I don't like pumpkin spice latte.
Yeah. So
It feels like a
trying,
thing for the fall girlies.
yes, I've been trying to figure out when a reasonable time is for me to put up my fall slash Halloween decorations. And
Yeah.
I think it's coming up. I'm ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also ready for fall. I'm like super excited because it's like my daughter's like for like she didn't really dress up for Halloween. She was just kind of like still like a potato, like as like a
Yes.
newborn, right? But I'm like this year she's like walking. And so I'm like, okay, what
Do you have a
neighborhood do we
costume?
want to go to? And no, but I'm like, what do I want to have her dress up as? Like, I don't know. And I'm like, I have so many ideas. Like, I really love a little Flintstones theme so the whole family can get in on it and
Oh,
she can be
yes.
Bam Bam. That would be so fun. But I don't know. TBD on what Charlie Girl is going to
You
be
have a
for
little bit
Halloween.
of time. You have, 2 months, but never too
Yeah,
early to start planning.
I know, exactly. And then just like our family's like football like maniacs. Like I'm like
Yes,
we just signed up for
including
Sunday ticket. We're going to be watching all the games. I'm like college football starts this Saturday. I'm so excited. Like I'm just like yes, we are like totally ready for all of that too.
us,
And
so
our
ready. And I
friends
don't even like me personally, I don't like football, but I love just like football on the TV, like hanging out with friends, like ready,
yes.
ready, ready.
Yes, and our friends are such great hosts. They're like football Sunday at our house and they like have a whole spread and it's like a potluck and they invite all their people over and the kids are playing. And so I'm just like, oh, I'm so excited for that this
Let's
year.
do it.
Uh,
Yes,
I just feel like it's so good. So yeah, love that.
yes,
Love that
yes.
you said that. Cooler temps, fall football, fall decorations. It's all coming here soon. Y'all, thank you so
All the
much
things.
for joining us. Whether you're tuning in live or catching the replay, we covered a wide gamut, like I said, of things that all have to do with ultimately creating a customer experience, but using canned messages to achieve that. So if you just caught the tail end, go back and rewind and catch the beginning of this. So much good stuff. We will catch y'all again next week for another edition of Ugly Mug Marketing Coffee Chats. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.